hello, welcome, welcome. My name is Serona Elton. I am the head of educational partnerships for the Mechanical Licensing Collective, the MLC. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for this special webinar. We've never done this one before, so we're happy you're here with us for this. So the way this works is I have a presentation to make to you with some slides, and then we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So a couple of housekeeping matters. When questions pop into your mind, you don't have to wait till the end to ask them, but we ask that you please put them in the Q&A. So this is a Zoom webinar. It's a little different than a Zoom meeting. And what that means is at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A option. So that is where you're going to drop your questions, put them in the Q&A, not in the chat, okay, not in the chat. So what we will do is we will post information in the chat that you might find helpful. And a lot of those posts are going to be made by who we call our webinar queens. They're hiding in the background. They make this all work smoothly today. We've got Brianna and Lacey with us. And so they will post things in the chat for you that I might be referring to something on our website, and they'll post the link to the website there. And so if those are helpful to you, you could copy and paste those somewhere. But please put your questions in the chat. Please put your questions in the Q&A, question and answer in the Q&A, not in the chat. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, here we are. Okay, so this webinar is about, we call the 4 eyes. And not eyes like this, and some of us wear glasses and we're like, oh, 4 eyes, that's not what we mean. The 4 eyes, these are unique codes we're gonna tell you all about. And these are the ones we want you to look out for, really important information about people and intellectual property, really important metadata for you to understand. So we're gonna tackle them one by one. Okay, so the agenda. First, I'm gonna make sure everybody's clear on the difference between a musical work and a sound recording. Gotta always make sure everyone's on the same page with that. We're gonna work our way through the 4 I's. That's the IPI, the ISWC, the ISRC, and the ISNI. And then we'll have a bit of a recap and we'll have time for questions. So here's something else I'm gonna ask for you to bear with me. Some of you on this webinar have never even heard of these. That's why we're here. Some of you have been doing this a long time and you're like an expert. You have like a master's degree in these identifiers, okay? What I need to do is first start simple and get the folks that are with us who are like, what are these identifiers? What do I need to know? Let me build a foundation of knowledge through the presentation, tackle some basic questions, and then we can certainly get into some complexities about these, once we kind of cover the basics, because none of these are perfect. There are quirks, there are some problems, right? None of these are perfect, but before we can kind of jump into the real complexity, we have to make sure that everybody gets to a solid foundation level of understanding. So I'm gonna crank through the presentation, be thinking about your questions, put them in the chat, and we'll try to knock out the more foundational ones first and then get into the complexities second. You know, it's kind of like beginner, intermediate, advanced. I don't want to jump straight to advanced. We'll start with beginner first, okay? All right, so thanks for your patience on that. So let's make sure everybody knows the difference here. I'm sure you do, but it's important because if you're confused on this, the identifiers will be confusing too. All right, so songs or compositions, right? The copyright law calls these musical works. We sometimes call them songs, sometimes we call them musical works. It's the same thing. It all means the same thing when we use that terminology in what we do. And these are typically created by songwriters or composers and lyricists, which many of you, I'm sure, are. And they're usually administered by music publishers, although some of you out there are self-administered, where you are acting like the music publisher that is administering the musical works you have created. So the copyright law actually defines these as the music, which includes melody, rhythm, or harmony that could be expressed in a system of notation. Like you could take a song and put it on a staff with little musical notes. You could do that. And the words, if there are any. My favorite example, the song Yesterday by John Lennon, Paul McCartney. Such an amazing, amazing song. That is in contrast to recordings And in this way, we're talking about sound recordings, okay? Usually created by recording artists and producers, often distributed by record companies. Some of you may also be artists, and some of you may even be do-it-yourself artists where you are handling putting the record out and you're going through like a digital distributor, for example. But they are different than musical works. And even some of you might wear two hats, right? Songwriter and artist. And it's also important to understand a sound recording is different from an audio-visual work, which is a video. And so that's why music is so complicated. Can you imagine you're watching a music video and you've got 3 copyrights baked in there? The music video copyright, the sound recording copyright, the musical work copyright. It's a crazy industry we work in, right? And so going back to that example, the song Yesterday was first performed and recorded by the Beatles, right? But then that song was actually recorded by many other artists. In fact, it's one of the most recorded songs of all time, including Elvis Presley, Aretha Franklin, Frank Sinatra, many more. So all of those recordings, we tend to refer to them as cover records, meaning that the song has already been recorded and released out there by the first artist to record it. And then all of those are subsequent recordings of that same song by multiple artists. So you start to see this kind of one-to-many relationship, right? Where you could have one musical work that's related to lots of different recordings of that musical work. That's an important concept to get as we start talking about these identifiers, and you can imagine how you could relate these identifiers to each other if you were making those connections. Okay. All right, so now let's get to the real, the star of the show for today. Are these 4 I's, right? The 4 identifiers. So here's what those acronyms stand for. IPI stands for Interested Party Information. ISWC stands for International Standard Musical Works Code. Yeah, they left the M out of the acronym. They didn't ask me when they did this. I would have said leave the M in there, but so ISWC, that's what it stands for. ISRC is the International Standard Recording Code. And then the ISNI, which we often just pronounce the ISNI, it's got a little ISNI thing going on, is the International Standard Name Identifier. Of the 3, that's the newest and the least known, but you guys are at the cutting edge, so you're going to be in the know before a lot of other people are, which you probably are already, which is why you're here today. So let's take these one at a time. The Interested Party Information Identifier. Let's start with that. Okay, the IPI. So IPI numbers, these are numeric, okay? They are used to identify parties that have an interest or a share, like that you wrote a song, you own a share of a composition or a musical work. This is in the musical work side of the business. This is in the song side of the business. So IPIs are assigned to songwriters, composers, lyricists, and arrangers and music publishers, right? So the IPI side is on the song side, not on the recording side of the business, okay? And they actually, it's a slightly more complicated identifier than some of the other ones in that there's kind of 2 of them and they're related to each other. So there's something called an IPI base number, which is a unique identifier assigned to a person or a company, like an actual human being, right? An individual or a company. And that number is something that really generally just that number and the organization that assigned it to you. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then you also have something called a name number, and you can have many name numbers because they are assigned to each name that is known, the rights holder is known by. So maybe you write songs under 2 different names. You could end up with 2 different name numbers assigned to you, but both would relate back to that one base number, right? So just like I could have, I don't know. Well, if I introduce analogies, sometimes I make it worse. So we'll leave it at that, you could have more than one name number assigned to you, even though you have one base number assigned to you. So you might say, what do these look like? Okay, don't worry, there won't be a quiz. You don't have to memorize the format. This is just so that you might recognize it. So IPI base number is 1 letter, 10 numeric digits, right? So that's the pattern that looks like. The IPI name number is all numeric. So that is what you see out there. And you can see IPIs all over the place, like on performing rights organizations' websites. They are publicly seen. It's not a secret number, not the name number. And so here's a great example. Those of you who know me know I am like the biggest Prince fan in the world. I'm also a professor, and I think every single class I find some way to mention Prince. Can't help it. So we had to use a Prince example here. So Prince Rogers Nelson is actually his legal full name. And he has only one IPI base number, but he would write under multiple names, some of which were our pseudonyms you would never even know about. But so, you know, he ended up with multiple IPI name numbers under Prince, under Nelson Prince Rogers, and under Nelson Prince R. So some of you may have more than one, which might have been intentional, or it could have been a data mistake. And frankly, I will say this also, none of these are perfect. And like I said, when we get to sort of a more advanced stage of today's session, we can talk about the complexities. But if one person or one piece of intellectual property has multiple identifiers, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. What's problematic is when one identifier could identify two different people. That wreaks havoc. Like imagine that, you know, one social security number was assigned to two people, or one passport identifier was assigned to two people, or one phone number was assigned to two people. That creates a mess. But if you have two numbers or something, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. So, so just keeping that in mind in case you're looking at this going, I have two of these, oh my gosh, you know, what happened? It's okay, all right? It's not perfect, but it's okay. All right, so let's carry on. So who assigns an IPI? Oh, sorry, what does it do? So it plays a role in helping relate information to each other, right? So if I'm trying to list in a database, who are the writers of this song? Yes, I could just do that by name, but there are some names that are pretty common, right? Imagine you're a songwriter and your name is John Smith. Well, it would not be surprising if, you know, we assigned the wrong John Smith to be associated with a particular song. I mean, even if you said, well, yeah, but if you look at that John Smith's like birth date and end date, I guarantee you there are at least two songwriters, both named John Smith, who have the same date of birth. Inevitably, that is the case. And so when you're trying to relate data in databases, you try not to do that based on text only. That really causes a lot of problems. And so what you try to do is you try to give all these different things you're trying to associate with each other, like writers associated with publishers and writers associated with songs. The better way to do it is to give all of those things their own unique identifier. And then you can just click, connect those identifiers, like relate them to each other. And so that's what the IPI does. And a lot of these other identifiers is the real benefit to them is that they help make these associations much more clear and very, you know, lots of confidence because they are based on the relationships between identifiers and not just on text. And so these play a role in helping make sure that the right money gets routed to the right person when you're trying to figure out, is it that John Smith or is it that John Smith, okay? So who assigns them? When a rights holder registers, when you sign up as a writer with a PRO, or you sign up as a publisher with a PRO, they give you assigned a base number and a name number, and then that identifier stays with you forever. Even if you switch PROs later, like if you sign up with ASCAP, you get your identifiers and later you switch to BMI, those identifiers should not be changing. Your affiliation changes, but these identifiers are meant to be permanent. So these are some examples of performing rights associations, right, that assign these. In the US and really all over the world, this happens when you first sign up with a PRO. So really important note here, writer IPIs are different than publisher IPIs, okay? They are different. Writers get an IPI, publishers get an IPI. If you are a self-administered writer, if you're a self-administered writer, you should be joining a PRO, performing rights organization, as both a writer and as a publisher. You don't have to have set up a legal entity. You don't have to have like an LLC or a corporation or an S Corp to register as a publisher with a PRO. You don't have to have a separate legal entity, but you will pick a publisher name. You don't have to have that registered as a trademark. You don't have to do any of that, but you should be registering as a writer and as a publisher if you are self-administered. And when you do that, your publishing entity with the PRO will be assigned its own separate publisher IPI, okay? So it's not the same. A writer IPI and a publisher IPI are not the same. They're assigned separately. And if you are self-administered, you will want both, okay? All right, so let's move to the next one. ISWC, this is assigned to a musical work, a unique musical work. They are made up of 11 characters. This is kind of what it looks like. The first letter right now starts with the letter T as in Tom, and then you have a number, and then there's this thing on the end called a check digit. If you're a real techie person, that number is calculated with an algorithm to make sure the other stuff like doesn't have a typo in it. I'll leave it at that. These are the very first one, bit of trivia, right? You never know, this could be on Jeopardy. First ISWC was assigned in 1995 for the musical work Dancing Queen by ABBA. Love that song. And that is the code. And they are, since then, right, the numbers keep getting higher and higher and higher. So what does it do? This identifies a musical work, AKA song, AKA composition, right? In all the ways that musical work is used, right? Because the musical work, that's the intellectual property. That musical work might be turned into a recording. It might be sold as sheet music. The lyrics might be used, right? Lots of different ways that underlying song can be used besides just made into a recording. But the ISWC represents that intellectual property, not necessarily a manifestation of a product that includes that intellectual property, right? So it represents the intellectual property that is a musical work. And it's used also for routing money and tracking credits and all kinds of, when you're trying to manage information about musical works. Again, I bet there's a song called I Will Always Love You. I bet there's a zillion songs called that, right? Because song titles are not protected by intellectual property law generally. So lots of songs with the same title. You don't want to be trying to guess if it's the right one based on the text. It's much better to have an identifier. Who assigns it? Just like an IPI, these are assigned the first time a musical work is registered with a qualified ISWC agency, and generally those are the performing rights organizations. And they all tap into a central database because you can imagine you might have two writers, let's say one's with ASCAP, one's with BMI, and then they both register the same song with their PRO, which is what they should do. The PROs all connect into one big database of these identifiers. So you don't have ASCAP assigning the same song a different ISWC than BMI would assign, right? They tap into one database that assigns these ISWCs. That is how that is done. International Standard Recording Code, ISRC, it's like a sister to the ISWC. It identifies recordings, specifically sound recordings and, strangely, music videos. And the reason for that is this kind of came out of the recording industry, the record company part of the business, who are responsible for recordings and usually also the production of music videos, which is different than the film companies and television production companies. There's a separate identifier for those called an ISAN, an International Standard Audiovisual Work Number. Not getting into that, but in case you wondered, other industries, film, television, book publishing, magazines, they all have their own identifiers too. They're everywhere. Even auto parts have identifiers. Seriously. So this one, the International Standard Recording Code, we care about it in this context because it's assigned to sound recordings and musical works and music videos, although MLC's got nothing to do with music videos, okay? So it's a 12-character identifier. All of these have, a standard, a published standard that lays out the rules about how it's constructed, right? The first two letters are actually a territory or country code. Then there's another section that represents the party who's assigning it. Then you have a year of reference, which nowadays means the year it's assigned, and then a unique set of 5 numbers after that. Real world example, another one of my favorite tracks, Outkast tune, Hey Ya. Love that, right? Polaroid picture. So that has this ISRC. These are public. And in fact, sorry, I meant to say ISWCs too. You can look them up. You can see them right there on the PRO website. They're out there for the public, not secret. Same thing with ISRCs. So you can see what was assigned here. And this is just specifically for the Outkast recording of Hey Ya. And by the way, an instrumental recording of that would have a different ISRC than the radio edit would have, than the extended remix would have. Those are 3 different recordings that would all have different ISRCs. And another example here is Obadiah Parker did a cover of this song, and that has a separate ISRC. So there are rules in the ISRC standards about just how much difference warrants a new ISRC, but different edits like that, different artists, all of those are examples where a new ISRC would be assigned because it's a different recording. So what are they used for? Same thing I really talked about. This is about, managing information about recordings. But the ISWC and the ISRC play an extra special role with the MLC. What we do this thing called matching, you might have heard of, right? Matching. And what matching is all about is we get sound recording usage information from digital services. They tell us this recording was streamed or this recording was downloaded this many times. And this is the ISRC. That's what the digital services tell us. They tell us some other information, but they generally are giving us the ISRC. We have to match that ISRC to the data in our database about musical works, which often, not always though, has an ISWC. And so we are forever working on making more and better quality links between the ISRC and the ISWC. In other words, matching sound recordings to their related musical works. And so we care a lot about these. We can match sound recordings to musical works even if we don't know either identifier. Okay, we can still do that. We can absolutely still do that. But having the identifiers makes it a lot easier, okay? It's a very, very helpful thing. So who assigns this? Generally, these are assigned by a record company during the production process after the record company has gone through its own process of being authorized to assign them. But for do-it-yourself artists who don't have a record company because they are acting like their own record company, when you are distributing your music through a service like TuneCore or CD Baby, they can assign ISRCs for you as well. The party that assigns the ISRC doesn't mean they have any ownership interest whatsoever in that recording, right? If you authorize CD Baby to assign you an ISRC, it doesn't mean they own your recording. If you don't own one of these codes, it's just assigned and there it is, right? So record companies usually assign these, but do-it-yourself artists may be getting these from what's called an authorized ISRC manager, which is probably their digital distributor. Okay, in the United States, the agency that a record company would have to go to or a digital distributor would have to go to be authorized to assign these, that is the RIAA. Okay, and if you're joining me from like the UK, it's called PPL. So different countries all have their own ISRC agency. Okay, we're coming in the home stretch. I'm sure the questions are blowing up, but I will get to them in a few minutes. The International Standard Name Identifier, known as the ISNI. Okay, so what is this? So this is the newest identifier of the 3. And it didn't start in the music industry, whereas those 3 other ones, those are homegrown. They came from the music industry. This one did not come from the music industry, but we have embraced it as an industry, but it's still early days. It's early days in a lot of the music industry even knowing what it is. So International Standard Name Identifier. So this is an identifier that represents the public identity of contributors and rights holders to all kinds of creative works. So in our world, that can include songwriters, it could include the artists, it could include producers, music publishers, record companies, but by the way, that could include book authors and photographers and painting, artists, graphical artists. So this is not music industry specific. This one is really broad, but it does apply in the music industry too. And so it's really long. As you can imagine, there's a lot more people and companies that are gonna have one of these than our other ones. And because it's newer, they've gotten the benefit of seeing, what's happened with the other identifiers and realizing the longer, the better in terms of unique assignments. So it's 16 numerical digits, usually divided, like when it's shown, into 4 chunks of data. Many songwriters, composers, lyricists, publishers, record companies all have one of these already and didn't even know it. The reason why, like, how did I get that? This is sort of embraced first by the library industry. And a lot of composers and publishers, fair enough, maybe not those of you who just put your record out yesterday, but people like Beethoven, for example, people like the Rolling Stones, for example, they were, when music was only available in physical form, CDs and vinyl, if a library was going to have a copy of that vinyl record or a CD in the library, they would assign an ISNI to the artist or the songwriter for that. And so a lot of different parties in the music business have these identifiers, and they were assigned before the music business was even like, wait, what's an ISNI? And so we've really embraced it, and now there are more entities in the music industry who are assigning them, which is really exciting. And these are public. There's an international ISNI site. You can look up anybody to see if they have an ISNI. So it was originally developed, as I said, a tool for all kinds of creators, not just music at all. There is a central database that assigns these, and there are authorized data contributors, is what they're called. They're authorized different kind of companies around the world who can submit records to that database to have a new one assigned. But what they try to do is very, very carefully look at, who is this Rolling Stones? Do they exist already? In which case, we don't want to assign a second one. We want to point that new person or that new data set to this existing one. So there's a lot of work that goes on in trying to make sure that more than one is not assigned. And so you can check it out on the web. In terms of the music industry, different companies that have are capable, like authorized to assign ISNIs, JAXA, Muso, Sound Exchange, YouTube. So again, it's pretty early days. If you heard of the others or never heard of this, don't worry, you're not late. It's pretty new, but hey, we want to be right there at the cutting edge, okay? All right, so almost done with the presentation portion. The 4 I's, where do you find them in the portal? Okay, so you see them on different screens, really, where you'll see that they're referenced, the interested party information, IPI, right? You'll see it on a screen. When you become a member, you may be asked, or there'll be a field for you to put in your IPI. You can see the ISRC in the sound recording data set, ISWC, when you're looking at musical works information. So there's different places in the portal to see them. So when you're registering work, here we go, and there you go. I know it's kind of hard to see, it's kind of small. There's information there where you can put it, and it's a really small screen. Sorry about that. This is the first time we've done this webinar, so maybe it's just because I'm looking on a laptop. It's kind of little, but you know what these acronyms, these 4 acronyms are now. So when you see them labeled on a field in the portal, it'll be easy for you to now know what they mean. So writers, for example, when you create a writer, you have the opportunity, it's not mandatory, but you have the opportunity to enter the writer's IPI number, right? So as part of registering a musical work, you can provide the ISWC. As part of setting up the writers that are associated with that musical work, you can provide their IPI. When you become a member, provide your IPI. So a couple different places where those live. Creating the publisher, there's where you put an IPI. Again, I know it's really too hard to see, it's really little, but in our public search also, you can see these identifiers, not secret. And again, as I mentioned, like you can see IPIs and ISWCs on all the PRO websites. Was that enough acronyms for you? I think I'm going to set a new challenge. Like, how many acronyms can I use in one sentence? You can find your IPI, your ISWC on the PRO website. Okay. And by the way, you can look up ISRCs on our website. Also, if you have the recording there, you can see the recording listed, but a great place to look up and find the ISRC information is on the Sound Exchange website. That's a great place to look up ISRCs. And for ISNIs, for ISNIs, the best place right now is to go to the global ISNI database. Okay, so there, for example, when you add a recording into the MLC portal, when you're associating that recording with your musical work, there's an ISRC field right there where you can put it. None of these are mandatory, but please give them to us if you know them. Please, please, please. It can only help us do a better job of matching that data and getting you paid. Okay, so I'm going to come out of screen share in 1 second, but jot this down if you didn't know it already, and I'm sure my webinar queens will throw it in the chat. If you have questions about any of that, usually we make a recording of this webinar available after the fact. There's information in our FAQs about all 4 of those identifiers. All those identifiers also have their own websites that explain what they are. You can also reach out to us via email by initiating it through that website form, or you can call us and we answer the phone. I know that's hard to believe, but we do answer the phone. All right, so I'm going to come out of screen share. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to go take a look at the Q&A. Now, this is the portion where I try to read out loud and I sound really silly, so bear with me. Okay, first question from Cheryl, and I'm keeping track of time. All right, we're good. Cheryl asks, how can I add the ISWC for pieces that have been posted on YouTube by the recording distributor? So if you're talking about adding the ISWC into the YouTube metadata, I don't know. I don't know. I would do a bunch of internet searching and see if perhaps YouTube knows. If not, what I would do is talk to the recording distributor and find out what metadata they provide YouTube. If they're providing the ISWC, check with that recording distributor to see if you can add that data into the metadata that you probably provided them before they distribute it. For example, let's say you're going through CD Baby or TuneCore or DistroKid, they get their metadata from you. And so I don't know offhand, but have a look when you're setting up your data with one of those distributors and you fill in the metadata, do they have a section for the ISWC? And if they don't, you should apply a little pressure to them to add that. But I don't know the answer beyond that, I'm afraid. But I would start with your recording distributor because that's generally where that metadata is getting to YouTube from. Okay, Janice asks, how important is it to list all sound recordings since the DSP isn't listed in the catalog entry? So I'm assuming what you mean is when you are setting up your musical works in our portal. And by the way, if I misunderstand your question, just post another one further down and correct me. If you're talking about setting up your recording information, when you set your musical work and you want to associate all the recordings, it's 100% important to let us know about all of the sound recordings. Generally, you don't have a separate sound recording on Spotify than you do Apple Music. So you're not telling us about the sound recordings by service, right? You're going to tell us the title of the sound recording, which is often the same as your song, title of the sound recording, name of the artist, and the ISRC. That should be the same ISRC on Spotify and Apple Music. You don't assign separate ISRCs for different music services, right? That's not how it should be done. If someone's done that because they didn't know what they're doing, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. What you would do is, let's say my song was called Thank Goodness It's Friday by Serona Elton, the artist. What I would do is and if I knew somehow that got ISRC 1 and ISRC 2, I'm going to set it up as 2 different recordings, same title, same artist with the 2 different ISRCs. That way, if either one of those ISRCs is reported to the MLC, they both match back to my musical work. So the ISRC is not different by digital service. It should be the same on all the digital services. But if more than one has been assigned, that's okay. That can still be routed back to the right place. Okay, all right, Helen asks, if someone starts as both a publisher and a writer, and later in their career they have a publisher, how does that affect their IPI numbers? Great question. Okay, so day one, you're self-administered, you sign up with BMI, and you sign up as a writer, you get your writer IPI, and you sign up as a publisher, Sirona Songs, and I get a publisher IPI. And then later, I do a deal with BMG. What would happen is nothing goes away about your publishing Sirona Songs IPI, but what would happen is BMG would send a letter of direction notifying everybody that there's been a publishing administration change, if perhaps in your deal with BMG that your songs are going to be handled by them. And so what would happen is usually your Sirona Songs publisher still stays there, nothing changes, but now the administrator for that work is BMG with their own IPI. So the song association to a particular publisher or administrator, that would be updated if you did a deal with a publisher later, like BMG, but your Sirona Songs, my example, the IPI assigned to your own publishing company, that's not going anywhere. That stays there. The song association would now have this administrator handling it. Okay, same, continued from Helen. Does a song with multiple versions, like a radio edit, a remix, an instrumental, have multiple ISWC numbers or only multiple ISRC numbers? So this can be a little tricky because the rules around when a new ISWC is issued are different from the rules around when a new ISRC is issued, right? So you could have, let's say, a song, let's say it was written by two songwriters, right? There could be a recording made of that has the lyrics and a separate recording that has the, that's instrumental. It's still one musical work. It's just that recording was an instrumental one. Okay, so in that context, the musical work has not changed. It's just that the recording didn't include lyrics. A remix, depending on what happens with the remix, it may or may not get a new ISWC. So for example, in one case, let's say the remix, actually now the remix includes a sample of some other song, right? Or the remix included some additional, compositional components. Another melody was thrown in there, mixed in there, like the remixer themselves really kind of became like a co-writer, all assuming everyone's agreed to it, right? If you really have that remix that's really shaking it all up and changed the melody and changed the verses around and did all this stuff, that would probably warrant a new ISWC. I am not the best expert on that topic, so there's my caveated warning, okay? So it depends on just how much has been changed. If it's just more up tempo or something, that may not warrant a change in the ISWC. There are special rules around it, and PROs are really the expert in that. I can tell you that in your example of a radio edit, a remix, or an instrumental, those definitely have different ISRCs. I think it depends on just how much that underlying musical work was changed about in each of those versions about whether or not it gets another ISWC. I can tell you an instrumental version just by itself, that does not change that. That would not warrant another ISWC. Okay, Dawn asks, if like CD Baby sets up an ISRC for my recordings that I own, and then I change my digital distributor to another company other than CD Baby, does the ISRC of my recording stay linked to CD Baby, or is that assigned to my new digital provider? Great question. So here's what I can tell you about how it's supposed to work. And those of you who may know more than me can certainly chime in and answer that. The way it's supposed to work is that ISRC should travel with it always. That's how it's supposed to work. Because the way it works with like an Apple Music or Spotify, they're not looking at the characters that are in the ISRC and figuring out where to route the money. That's just a unique identifier. There's a different attribute than that in the data set that those companies have that tells them where to route the money. So for example, like let's say, record companies buy recording catalogs from other record companies, right? So if I have a record company and I'm buying the whole catalog from this other artist that was on this other record company went out of business, I don't need to change those ISRCs. I am going to do something separate that tells all these digital services, I am now the party you pay. But they're not going to look to the first, like it's characters 3, 4, and 5 in the ISRC to figure out who to pay. It doesn't work that way. There'll be a separate data attribute that says this is who the money goes to. So they don't need that from a payment routing point of view. What I cannot say is when CD Baby assigns you these ISRCs, I don't know if it somehow says to you they can only be used if we're distributing it or not. They might be doing that. I don't know. I can say as a data purist, that's not how the ISRC standard is supposed to work, but sometimes practice doesn't follow the rules perfectly, as in many parts of our lives. So I haven't had a chance to see what's going on in the chat. Somebody else might have a better answer than that than I do. Okay. All right, we have another question. May I add the ISWC for a work into the MLC portal after I've already registered it? Absolutely. If you don't have the ISRC, if you do not have the ISWC, if you don't know it when you register your work with us, or if it hasn't been assigned one yet, no problem. You can come back and edit your works at any time. So same thing for IPIs, same thing for ISRCs. If when you first register your work, you didn't know all that, and then later you find it out, absolutely, you can just come right back in, edit your work, add that data, easy peasy, no problem. Okay, all right. Okay, so I think I did tackle Cheryl's question. David, okay, from Dave. I've read that the MLC has taken over, he puts in air quotes, taken over for Harry Fox and Music Reports. Does this mean registering with the MLC takes over from registering with those organizations? Or do we have to register with all three? Would Harry Fox be only for cover songs? All right, I'll tackle this quickly, but this is not really about identifiers. The MLC is not taking over, broadly speaking, from the Harry Fox Agency or Music Reports. Those two organizations continue to exist. They continue to do lots of different kinds of licensing activities because neither one was only doing digital compulsory mechanical licensing in the United States. Neither one of them was doing only that. So we have taken one slice of activity away from them, a particularly narrow slice that is digital compulsory mechanical licensing in the United States. That slice has moved away from them to us. But all the other things they do, like Harry Fox does physical mechanical licensing, and MRI has other things I think they do with digital services that you could opt into, right? So if you have a business practice today of registering your data with the Harry Fox Agency or Music Reports, because there are other kinds of voluntary licenses that they administer that you want to be in on, don't change that, okay? But only we can handle these new digital compulsory blanket mechanicals under the new law, the MMA. So, so that's how that works. Okay, carrying on. I'm going to try to focus mostly on data questions. So I might skip your question if it wasn't about data. Okay, is there any reason for creating a vanity publishing company through the PRO? Yes. There is, because you really want the writer to get the writer share, the publisher to get the publisher share, and you generally would like to have, you want a publisher name. There's benefits to having a publisher name associated with your song. So my belief is that yes, there is a benefit, but I'm not pretending to be the authority on PROs. Songwriter associations can probably give you some great advice about the pros and cons. I don't think there's any cons, but the pros to doing it. My personal belief is that it's a good thing. Okay, so Julie asks, if a writer has several name IPIs, should we somehow try to associate them to the base name? Is there a way to make sure nicknames get found in the search? So the first thing is to check with your PRO, because before they just assign more name numbers, my understanding was that each of those name numbers is associated with a base number, okay? So they wouldn't have just kind of randomly assigned them. But if you think that actually, because they didn't realize it was you, they did assign you multiple base numbers, call your customer service people at the PRO and say, hey, I think this is what has happened with my IPIs. Can you help me get them all fixed up and lined up together, right? They would be the right party to work with to correct anything you think is not quite right about your IPI data. They are the party. In terms of searching in a search, Right now, our database is not necessarily storing multiple relationships between multiple IPIs, but that's a great idea. And I love when data is related to other data. It's just I'm a data nerd. Love that. So that would be great if you looked up one name, like I looked up, Garth Brooks recorded under Chris Gaines. I'm not saying he wrote songs that way, but if I look up Chris Gaines, I also find Garth Brooks, right? That's a little bit of what like the ISNI is meant to do, is to say, I am like Beyonce, and I am an actress, and I am a singer, and I am a this, and I am a that, and all my works can be related back to one ISNI. So yeah, I'm with you there. That would just be total nirvana. Okay, Robin asks, once all one songs are registered, is there a way to print out, make a PDF spreadsheet of all the musical works? Great question. I am not sure of the answer. I know we are trying to build that, but here's what I do know. If you contact our customer experience team, they can download a list of your works and give that to you. They can definitely do that for you. I think we're working on making that a self-serve feature. They'd be happy to do it for you. So remember, 3 ways to reach us. You can call us by phone. You can initiate that request via email, or if you're in the portal, you can initiate it via the live chat. They can absolutely download or create a list and send it to you in a spreadsheet form. Okay, Janice, different sound recordings of a songwriter's song by different artists on different DSPs, how to find the ISRC. Okay, so rewording that. So Janice's situation is you have one song and you have multiple artists that have recorded it, and those different recordings are on different DSPs. Like maybe that one's on Apple, but it's not on Spotify, and that one's on SoundCloud, but it's not on Google. How do you find the ISRCs? So the first place to look for the ISRCs of recordings that have made of your song is on the Sound Exchange website. SoundExchange.com, there's an ISRC search. That would be the first place to look. And then hopefully you would see the ISRCs and the names of the artists. And then it's probably the case that that ISRC has traveled with that recording to the multiple services you've found that recording on, okay? That would be the first thing to do so that you could then proactively set those up in the MLC portal. When we roll out the claiming functionality in our portal, which I know everyone's super eager for, so are we, when that gets rolled out and you're able to search through transactional data from services where we have not been able to match the recording, you would find the recordings and you'll see the different ISRCs that they might be using there, and you can go, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. But in the meantime, you don't have to wait for that. Go to the Sound Exchange website, look up and see what those ISRCs are, and then set up those sound recordings in the MLC portal. On different services, you might also be able to, right-click on properties or, touch the 3 dots and maybe you'll see it. I'm not sure which services display it or not, but start with the Sound Exchange website. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. All right, David. So if there's multiple ISRCs for a song that's assigned by TuneCore for different comps that we've distributed with them and have different play counts. All right, hold on, let me read this. Could the more than one ISRC complicate the claim process? That one song, the different comps, should the ISRCs be listed in the MLC database, and why? Okay, so what it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, and I'm assuming when you say comps, you mean compilations. So you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're saying is your music, your recordings, your sound recordings are being distributed by TuneCore. And so let's say you put out one compilation and it had that song, that recording by Serona that said, thank goodness it's Friday. And you put that out there and TuneCore gave it an ISRC number 1. And then later you did a different compilation, right? Greatest hits from 2021 that included some recordings. And one of those recordings was, again, Thank Goodness for Fridays by the artist Serona. And you put that out as a separate compilation through TuneCore. And so they assigned it another ISRC. And so now that one recording called Thank Goodness It's Fridays by the artist Serona Elton has 2 ISRCs, 2 different assignments by TuneCore. If that's your fact pattern, then absolutely, in the MLC database, for that song, you should set up both recordings, right? They'll have the same title, same artist, 2 different ISRCs, because that way, if we get either of those ISRCs reported to us by the different services, all of those mechanical royalties will link back to that one musical work. So that is why you need to tell us about all of the recordings that have been made of your works. And if they have been assigned multiple ISRCs, not great, but not the end of the world, right? And I mentioned this earlier, because you might have put this question in before I answered that question for somebody else. Put both sound recordings in with their 2 different ISRCs. All right. Cheryl asks, isn't the ISWC the most important identifier in terms of getting paid as a composer? I would say it is the most important identifier. However, all by itself, the ISWC by itself is not going to get you all the way there in terms of getting all of your money. And the reason why is this. Probably the main source of revenue for a songwriter is going to be related to the recordings that have been made of their song, right? So as a songwriter, you've got public performance revenue, and that's going to come from when the sound recording is publicly performed on radio and streaming. It's going to come from when that song is played live, okay? So, and then you're going to have perhaps sheet music sales, right? And you're going to have synchronization of your musical work. So absolutely, the ISWC across the board, because your songs are the most important thing to you, therefore their identifier is the most important thing to you. So yes. However, I would say a very close second to that is knowing the ISRCs of the recordings that have been made of your musical works. Because if everywhere you are able to insert into the data set the fact that this ISRC is connected to this recording, you are enabling the matching process to go much more smoothly, right? Public performance organizations, they have to match radio airplay of sound recordings to musical works. They have to match streams on digital services to musical works. And so even the PROs, if they know the ISRCs that connect to musical works, it makes what they're doing much more correct, much more quickly, much more accurately. And so, yes, ISWC is important, but I would never suggest that you kind of go, ISRC, that's not my problem. If you're a songwriter and you want to make absolutely sure you're getting every penny due to you, you absolutely should care about the ISRC so that you can help everybody in the whole industry connect that ISRC to your ISWC, because nobody cares about your money as much as you do. So that would be a good way to, you know, kind of really do everything you can to set yourself up for financial success. All right, so let me see here. I've got like a few more minutes. Okay, Robin. When registering the name of the sound recording of your song, do you register the name of the song and also the name of the album the song is on with the artist's name? Okay, so firstly, let me distinguish, right? Remember, songs have songwriters, recordings have recording artists, albums are of recordings, right? So when you are setting up a sound recording in the database, in the portal, you're going to use the sound recording title. Now, let's be, most of the time, the sound recording title is the same as the song title, most of the time, but not always. I know there's a famous example that I don't remember exactly, but I think that the chestnuts roasting on an open flame, like that's not the same as the song title, or that's the song title and the recording names are different. I don't remember all the details, but every so often, the title of the sound recording is different than the title of the musical work. And so when you set up a sound recording, you should use the title of the sound recording as the sound recording title. And don't put the album name in. A sound recording is the sound recording. Unless you're somehow setting up, this is the album that includes the sound recording that includes the work, don't put the album title. That's not the sound recording title. Put the sound recording title in when you're setting up the sound recording. You put the recording title in, the artist name, the ISRC for that sound recording. Okay. Janice, okay, how can we download our catalog from MLC in a CSV file? Same thing, ask our customer experience team. Say, hey, can you send it to me in a CSV file, or can you send it to me in an Excel file? And they'll be happy to help you. Happy to help you. Okay, are we set up yet for bulk uploads by self-administered songwriters without publishing company? So I believe that at the moment, to use our bulk spreadsheet upload, you still need to have a publisher IPI number. So it doesn't mean you have to have created like, you know, an LLC or an S Corp, right? You can get a publisher IPI from your performing rights organization without having to set up a separate legal entity. But my understanding is that at the moment, you do still need to have a publisher IPI to upload in bulk, as opposed to just a writer IPI. But here's what I would also do, right? Reach out to our customer experience team, see if they can help you. If you were to send them what you do have, could they upload it for you? Don't hesitate to reach out and see how they could help you. And also consider, maybe it's time to get a writer IPI with your performing rights organization. Maybe that would be a good thing to do. You'd have to decide that personally. Okay, so last two questions. So this one comes from LinkedIn. I've registered over 100 works for legacy artists. I assume you mean songwriters, right? Because we're talking about songwriters, not artists. They have yet to see a royalty. Could the works be missing identifiers? Okay, this came from Bishop. So firstly, I'm assuming you mean you've registered 100 musical works for songwriters that, you know, have been around a long time, but they haven't seen any royalties yet. And I'm assuming that you register them because you are the authorized administrator of those musical works. And so if you've registered those with the MLC and those submissions have been accepted, then it's possible that we have not been able to match up the sound recording usage, the sound recording streams, sound recording downloads with those musical works, because there's no identifiers in the database and we've been trying to match them up based on title, and that isn't working. So in order for you to get any money, right, first thing is you have to be a member of the MLC. You have to be authorized, right, the authorized administrator that manages the rights for these songs. You have to register those songs with us. Those registrations have to be accepted, and then we have to match those musical works to those sound recordings. And so as part of your works registration, the more identifiers you give us, the better. That way we can match the sound recordings to those musical works. But if they're not getting anything whatsoever, I would reach out to our customer experience team to see where it is in those steps that something has broken down, because something sounds off there. All right, last question. David, we go back in time a few decades in making music, and would any of the vinyl back in the day have had ISRCs applied to them that we could track it back? So ISRCs started being assigned in the mid to late 90s. Remember, ISRCs are not assigned to a product. They're assigned to a sound recording. So if that sound recording was still being, and generally sometimes even not, if that sound recording was still being actively distributed in the 1990s on vinyl or CDs or tape, then that record company probably did assign an ISRC to it. And then that ISRC has traveled with it, however it's been used. But like, you wouldn't assign a different ISRC because that recording is on vinyl as opposed to a CD. In the record company database, that recording would exist once, it would be given an ISRC, and then that recording might appear on multiple products, one of which could be vinyl. So if it was way dropped from the catalog, like hadn't been, you know, was put out in the 60s and then the record was never released again after the 60s, the record company may not have assigned an ISRC in their database for it, but they might have. Quick question, where do you go to look? Sound Exchange website. That's where you go to look and see if that recording has an ISRC. Okay, so we covered like a million tons of stuff, and well done for hanging in there. It's complicated, I know it is, but here's what I can tell you. The more you just spend a little time getting familiar with it, the more you'll understand it. I bet you already are very comfortable with a bunch of identifiers in your life. You know your phone number, you probably know your social security number, you know, this tells you how much online shopping I do. I know my credit card number off by heart. I know it off by heart, which freaks people out a little. I actually know my driver's license number off by heart because I'm a nerd like that. So you have identifiers in your life already. You know how to handle identifiers. You know what that's like. Don't let this intimidate you. You just need to learn a little bit more about them. That's all. And there's information on our website. There's videos as well on our YouTube channel. And if you have questions, contact our support people, but don't be scared of them. They just maybe are new to you, and everything's scary when it's new, but you're probably already an identifier expert. You just didn't realize it. All right. So thank you for joining us for this brand new webinar. Have a fantastic weekend. Take care and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.